The massive crystal dome of Nexus Prime stretched high above the Galactic Prosperity Council chambers. 847 different species filled the curved seats that spiraled down toward the central speaking platform. The air hummed with translation, devices working overtime to convert thousands of languages into something resembling understanding. Ambassador Sarah stood at the human section, a small cluster of 17 seats near the back. She held a simple white tablet in her hands. The document displayed on it was barely 1 page long. After 3 years of serving as Earth's representative, she had learned that most council business involved documents hundreds of pages thick, filled with complex legal language that took weeks to review. This one was different, simple, direct. The Terran Federation formally withdraws from the Galactic Prosperity Council, she announced when her turn came. Her voice carried clearly through the chamber's acoustic enhancement system. We cite philosophical differences regarding resource allocation and defensive protocols. We thank the Council for the educational experience and wish all member species prosperity in their future endeavors. That was it. No dramatic speech, no list of complaints, no threats or ultimatums. Chancellor of the Empire barely looked up from his data pad. The crystalline hegemony's representative continued their whispered conversation with the trade minister. A few species near the human section glanced over with mild curiosity, but most continued with their own business. The mining consortium's speaker actually seemed pleased. Finally, he rumbled through his translation collar. Their constant questions about worker conditions were becoming tiresome. Ambassador gathered her simple belongings. Unlike other species who traveled with large staffs and elaborate technological displays, the human delegation consisted of just 5 people with basic equipment. They had always seemed oddly modest for a spacefaring civilization. As she walked toward the exit, a few other ambassadors nodded politely. The representative, ambassador, approached with genuine concern in his 4 eyes. "Is there nothing that can change your minds?" he asked in his precise way of speaking. Smiled sadly. "We tried to fit in, we really did, but our ways of thinking are just too different. You all prefer large, centralized systems. We prefer small, distributed ones. You build for efficiency. We build for survival. It's not right or wrong, just different." His head tilted in the gesture of confusion. "But your contributions to the council have been valuable. Your agricultural worlds feed 3 sectors. Your medical research has helped millions." "And all of that will continue," assured him. "We're not closing our borders or ending trade. We're just stepping back from the political side of things." Behind them, the council had already moved on to the next item of business. The Republic was proposing new shipping regulations that would affect trade routes across half the galaxy. The debate would probably last for months. Within hours, human diplomatic stations across Council space began their quiet shutdown. The process was remarkably smooth. Human staff packed their belongings in simple containers and said their goodbyes to local colleagues. There were no protests, no emergency meetings, no last-minute attempts to change anyone's mind. The humans had always been like this, their colleagues realized. Polite but determined, friendly but independent. They participated in council activities but never seemed fully committed to the grand vision of unified galactic civilization. On the trading floors of Nexus Prime, market analysts barely registered humanity's departure. Humans controlled small percentages of major industries. Their ships were adequate but not impressive. Their technology was reliable but rarely cutting-edge. Their military was defensive and small. The humans were never really players in the big game anyway, explained economic advisor during the evening news broadcast. They focused on farming and philosophy instead of the serious business of galactic development. The news media gave the human withdrawal minimal coverage. 3 minutes on the evening reports, buried between a story about new mining rights in the outer spiral and updates on the latest entertainment broadcasts from the core worlds. Dr. Kaur, a political scientist from the Academic Council, offered what most considered an insightful analysis. Humanity represents the classic case of a young species that developed space travel before developing the social sophistication necessary for galactic integration. Their withdrawal was inevitable. Several species privately expressed relief. The humans had possessed an uncomfortable habit of asking awkward questions during council sessions. Questions about why certain decisions were made behind closed doors. Questions about why some species seemed to have more influence than their official votes indicated. Questions about emergency protocols and backup plans. Ambassador and of the Trade Federation had found these questions particularly irritating. They acted as if they expected the entire galactic economy to collapse if one or two major systems failed, he complained to his staff. Such lack of confidence in our established systems. The human ships departing Council space were not impressive. Small vessels, maybe 100 meters long each, with crews of only a few dozen. Nothing like the massive kilometer-long ships that serious spacefaring nations used for important missions. They moved in loose formations rather than the precise military arrangements that demonstrated proper organization. Most headed toward the galactic rim, toward the empty regions where no sensible species bothered to establish major colonies. A few veteran traders who had dealt with humans for decades knew this fit their pattern. Humans had always preferred frontier regions to the comfortable, developed core worlds. They're like gardeners, observed Captain A freighter commander who had transported human goods for 20 years. They like to start from scratch and build things slowly. Very strange people, nice enough but strange. By the end of the week, the 17 empty seats in the council chambers had been removed entirely. The space was given over to expanded seating for the growing Dominion delegation, which had been requesting additional representation for their expanding territory. The only real inconvenience was updating the official council records. 847 members became 830 members. Several clerkbots spent busy days updating databases and recalculating voting percentages. Life in the galaxy continued exactly as it had before. Trade flowed along established routes. The great engineering projects continued on schedule. The elaborate entertainment networks continued broadcasting to billions of eager viewers. Nobody noticed the small maintenance contracts quietly expiring on remote mining equipment. Nobody paid attention to the minor software updates that suddenly stopped arriving for various civilian systems. Nobody thought about the small research groups that had quietly closed their offices and disappeared. After all, the humans had been such a minor part of galactic civilization. Their departure was bound to have minimal impact. The galaxy had functioned for millions of years before humanity arrived. It would continue functioning long after they left. Everyone was completely certain of this fact. The first sign of trouble appeared 3 months after the humans left. Mining Supervisor H was reviewing daily reports from the consortium's operations across the Sigma Quadrant when something caught his attention. Production numbers were dropping. At first he assumed it was a normal fluctuation. Mining equipment broke down regularly. Ore deposits ran dry. Workers got sick. But as he dug deeper into the data, a disturbing pattern emerged. 12 different mining operations on 12 different worlds were experiencing the same problem. Their quantum excavators were shutting down one by one, not breaking exactly, but simply refusing to start their morning cycles. The machines would run their self-diagnostic checks, find nothing wrong, and then display a simple message: maintenance contract expired. H had been in the mining business for 37 years. He had never seen this particular error message before. Contact the manufacturer, he ordered his assistant, a nervous young named A. 2 hours later, A returned with a confused expression. Sir, the manufacturer says they never made those particular excavators. The serial numbers don't match anything in their system. That's impossible. We've been using these machines for 15 years. The manufacturer checked again. They sold us basic excavator units 15 years ago, but the machines we're actually using have been modified so extensively that they're essentially different equipment. Someone upgraded our hardware and software multiple times over the years, but there's no record of who did the work. H felt a cold sensation in his stomach. What about the maintenance contracts? That's where it gets strange, sir. The contracts were managed by something called Reliable System Solutions. But when our legal department tried to contact them, they discovered the company was registered on a small human colony world. The office closed down 3 months ago. Across the galaxy, similar conversations were taking place in boardrooms and administrative centers. The Republic's food distribution network was experiencing its own crisis. For decades, their sophisticated logistics system had efficiently moved agricultural products from farming worlds to population centers across 17 star systems. The system was so reliable that most took it for granted, like gravity or starlight. Administrator stared at his main display screen in horror. Instead of the usual neat flow charts showing orderly food shipments, he saw chaos. Ships were being sent to wrong destinations. Agricultural products were spoiling in warehouses while other facilities reported shortages. Some vessels were stuck in transport loops, jumping between the same 3 systems over and over. What happened to the routing algorithms? He demanded. His technical staff looked embarrassed. Chief Programmer stepped forward nervously. Sir, we've discovered that our basic software was upgraded many years ago by an outside consultant firm. The upgrades were so subtle that our people never realized how much the system had been improved. We thought it was just normal optimization. And now, the consulting firm was called Adaptive Solutions. They were based on New Terra. When the humans from Council Space, they closed all their off-world offices. Can't we just revert to the original software? We tried, sir, but our entire supply chain has grown to depend on the improvements. The original software can't handle the complexity of our current operations. We're trying to rebuild the routing systems from scratch, but it could take years. Problems were spreading faster than anyone expected. On 17 different worlds, atmospheric processors that had been running perfectly for decades suddenly began producing air that was technically breathable but somehow felt wrong. Investigation revealed that small modifications had been made to the original atmospheric mixers, adjustments so minor that nobody had bothered to document them. The modifications were signed with a simple digital signature, Terran Environmental Solutions. Hospital administrators across 3 sectors were panicking as their medical systems began reverting to older, less effective protocols. Life support units that had been keeping patients stable for months suddenly required constant manual adjustment. Surgical robots that had been performing complex operations with incredible precision started requesting human oversight for procedures they had been handling automatically. The medical AI systems hadn't broken down completely, but they had definitely gotten. Dr. A, Chief Medical Officer at Central Medical on Altair Prime, was the first to figure out what had happened. Someone had been continuously updating and improving our AI systems, she explained to the hospital board. Small improvements every few months, each one making our systems a little more intelligent, a little better at handling unusual cases. Who was doing this? The updates came from something called Biomedical Innovation Group. The interesting thing is, we never hired them. According to our records, they were providing their services free of charge as part of some kind of research project. And now our systems are reverting to their baseline programming from 20 years ago. They still work, but they're not nearly as capable as we thought they were. On Nexus Prime, emergency council sessions were being called daily as reports poured in from across galactic space. What had started as isolated equipment failures was revealing itself to be something much larger. The trade minister stood before the emergency assembly, his usually calm demeanor replaced by obvious frustration. "We are facing a systematic crisis," he announced. "Infrastructure failures are being reported from over 3,000 different systems. The common factor appears to be maintenance and improvement services provided by small human companies that nobody bothered to keep detailed records about." Chancellor leaned forward in his crystalline throne. "How is this possible? The humans were a minor species. They contributed agricultural products and basic trade goods." "That's what we all believed," the trade minister replied grimly. "But it appears they were also providing technical services across the galaxy. Small contracts, minor consulting work, routine maintenance. The kind of unglamorous work that major corporations don't bother with. And we never noticed. Why would we? The work was reliable, affordable, and usually improved whatever systems they touched. Most species assumed their equipment was simply running better because of natural technological advancement." In the archives beneath the council chambers, research teams were working frantically to understand the scope of the problem. What they were finding was disturbing. Human companies, usually very small firms with modest names, had been providing services across galactic civilization for over 2 centuries. Not flashy, headline-grabbing work, but the basic maintenance and improvement that kept complex systems running smoothly. The humans had been particularly active in areas that other species found boring: waste management, environmental control, safety protocols, backup systems, and redundant networks. The kind of unglamorous but essential work that kept civilization functioning. Research Coordinator presented her preliminary findings to the Emergency Committee. "We've identified over 15,000 different human companies providing various services across Council space. Most were small operations, maybe 5 to 50 employees each. They worked on everything from starship navigation software to agricultural optimization to traffic control systems." "What was their motivation?" asked Economic Advisor. "If they were providing services for such low fees, often for free, what did they gain?" "That's unclear. Many of them seem to operate as research projects or educational programs. They would take on maintenance contracts and then gradually improve whatever they were working on, apparently just to see if they could make it better." As the reports continued flowing in, a disturbing picture was emerging. The humans hadn't just been minor participants in galactic civilization. They had been its invisible maintenance crew, quietly keeping things running while everyone else focused on the exciting work of expansion and development. And now they were gone. The galaxy was about to learn just how much it had been depending on them. The quantum communication network was the backbone of galactic civilization. Without it, trade would be impossible, governments would collapse, and the billion-world economy would grind to a halt. So when Communication Director noticed the first signs of instability, he immediately called an emergency alert. "We're getting quantum decoherence in 17 different relay stations," he reported to the Technical Council. "The entanglement networks are losing synchronization." "How is that possible?" demanded Chief Engineer Al. "Those networks have been stable for over 3 centuries. "That's what we thought. But we've discovered that the quantum error correction systems have been receiving regular updates for decades. Small improvements that helped maintain entanglement over longer distances and through more complex routing." "From whom?" "A company called Quantum Dynamics Research. They were based on Terra Nova. The last update was received 4 months ago, just before the humans from Council space." By the end of the week, faster-than-light communication was failing across 3 spiral arms. Messages that should have taken hours to transmit were either arriving scrambled or not arriving at all. Ships found themselves cut off from their home bases, operating on standing orders that might no longer be relevant. The situation got worse when navigation systems began reverting to basic protocols. Captain had been running commercial freight routes for 22 years. She knew every major shipping lane in the galaxy. But when her ship's navigation computer suddenly announced it could only plot direct point-to-point jumps, she realized something was seriously wrong. "What happened to the advanced routing?" she asked her navigation officer. "It's gone, Captain. The system says it's reverting to factory default settings. We can still navigate, but only using the simple methods. No more complex multi-jump routes, no more automatic optimization for fuel efficiency or traffic avoidance." "How is this possible?" Her navigation officer looked embarrassed. "It appears our routing software was being continuously improved by an outside service, something called Pathfinder Solutions. The improvements were so gradual and smooth that we never realized they weren't part of the original system. And now we navigate like our grandparents did, one jump at a time, calculating each route manually." Across the galaxy, ships were discovering the same problem. The sophisticated pathfinding algorithms that had made modern space travel efficient and safe were disappearing. Navigation that had been automatic now required constant human attention. Routes that had been optimized over decades were reverting to crude approximations. The medical crisis was becoming catastrophic. Dr. A stood in the intensive care unit of New Altair General Hospital, watching in horror as life support systems that had been automatically maintaining critically ill patients began requiring constant manual adjustment. "Patient in bed 7 is destabilizing," called nurse. "Increase oxygen flow manually," Dr. A ordered. "The automatic regulation isn't working properly anymore." For the third time that week, she found herself performing tasks that the hospital's AI systems had been handling flawlessly for years. It was like watching medical technology regress by decades. Chief of Staff Dr. A called an emergency meeting. "We've lost approximately 60% of our automated medical capabilities," he announced grimly. "Our surgical robots require constant supervision. Our diagnostic systems are missing obvious symptoms. Our life support units need manual calibration every few hours." "How did this happen so suddenly?" asked Dr. A. "It wasn't sudden. Our systems have been slowly reverting to older programming for the past 2 months. We just didn't notice because the changes were gradual, and our staff unconsciously started compensating by doing more manual work." "Who was maintaining our systems?" "Something called Galactic Medical Solutions. They were providing continuous system updates as part of what we thought was a standard maintenance contract. Turns out they were dramatically improving our capabilities, but they never told us how dependent we had become on their modifications." On terraforming worlds, the situation was becoming desperate. Atmospheric Engineer watched helplessly as the terraforming processors on New Garden began producing an atmosphere that was technically breathable, but somehow felt wrong to every species that tried to breathe it. "The oxygen levels are correct," she reported to Colonial Administrator. "The nitrogen balance is perfect. All the trace gases are within acceptable ranges, but something is off." "What do you mean off?" "It's hard to explain. The air feels stale, even though it's fresh. People are getting headaches and feeling tired. It's as if the atmosphere lacks something essential that we can't measure." Investigation revealed that the atmospheric processors had been subtly modified over the years. Small adjustments to gas mixing ratios, tiny additions of trace compounds, microscopic changes to particle filters. Each modification had been so minor that no one had bothered to document it. "The modifications were signed by Atmospheric Dynamics Corporation," reported Chief Engineer. "They made thousands of tiny improvements over the past 15 years. improvements that apparently made the difference between technically correct atmosphere and actually livable air. And now we're producing air that meets all the technical specifications but doesn't feel right to breathe. We're trying to reverse engineer what they did, but there are thousands of small changes to sort through. The most shocking revelation came when the Galactic Council itself began experiencing problems. The sophisticated voting systems that had managed the complex democracy of 830 species were malfunctioning. Parliamentary Coordinator stared at her displays in confusion. "The vote counting system is giving inconsistent results," she reported to Chancellor. "The same vote counted 3 different ways produces 3 different outcomes. How is this possible? Our voting algorithms have been receiving continuous improvements for over a century. Small enhancements to handle edge cases, resolve ties, manage complex multi-party proposals. The improvements were so subtle that we thought they were just normal system maintenance." Who was providing these improvements? A consulting group called Democratic Systems Research. They were apparently run by political scientists from several human universities. They provided their services free of charge as part of ongoing research into large-scale democratic processes. The Chancellor felt a cold realization settling over him. "Are you saying that our entire governmental system has been dependent on human political science research?" "It appears so, sir. The original voting system was designed for maybe 50 species with relatively simple political structures. The enhancements allowed us to manage the complex democracy we have today. Without them, we're reverting to a system that can't handle the complexity of modern galactic government." Emergency sessions of the Council were becoming daily events, but even the emergency procedures were failing. The crisis management protocols that had guided the galaxy through previous emergencies were breaking down as the systems that supported them reverted to older, less sophisticated versions. Research teams working around the clock were discovering the true scope of the problem. Human influence had been everywhere, invisible but essential. They had improved transportation systems, optimized resource distribution, enhanced communication networks, refined manufacturing processes, and upgraded safety protocols. Most disturbingly, they had done all of this quietly, without fanfare or recognition. While other species had focused on building impressive megaprojects and expanding their territory, humans had been making the basic systems of civilization work better. Dr. Kaur, the political scientist who had dismissed humanity's withdrawal as inevitable, found herself revising her analysis. "We made a fundamental error in understanding," she admitted to a colleague. "We assumed that because humans weren't major players in the visible economy, they weren't important to galactic civilization. And now we're learning that they were the invisible foundation that everything else was built on. They weren't interested in controlling galactic civilization. They were interested in making it work properly." As the crisis deepened, a terrible truth was becoming clear. The galaxy had not been as stable and self-sufficient as everyone had believed. For over 2 centuries, human ingenuity had been quietly holding galactic civilization together, solving problems that most species hadn't even known existed. And now, for the first time in centuries, the galaxy was having to function without them. It wasn't working very well. Admiral had commanded fleets through 3 galactic conflicts, but she had never led an expedition as desperate as this one. 10,000 ships from 17 different species stretched across space in the largest search formation in galactic history. Their mission was simple in concept but challenging in practice: find the humans and convince them to return. "This is humiliating," muttered Commander Al from his position at the tactical display. "The greatest military alliance in galactic history, sent begging to a species we barely noticed 6 months ago." Admiral understood his frustration. The Dominion Navy was accustomed to projecting power, not pleading for help. But the reports from home left no room for pride. Galactic civilization was collapsing one system at a time. "Contact from the sensor grid," announced communications officer. "We're detecting artificial signals from the 442 system, approximately 15 light-years beyond the established galactic rim." "Finally," Admiral said with relief, "set course for 442 and prepare the diplomatic protocols. We're not here to intimidate anyone." The fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the 442 system and found something that challenged every assumption about advanced civilization. Instead of the massive orbital stations and planet-wide cities that marked developed space, they discovered something entirely different. "I'm reading multiple small settlements across 7 different worlds," reported Science Officer. "No cities larger than maybe 50,000 inhabitants. No orbital megastructures. No planetary defense grids. It's as if they've deliberately chosen to build small." Admiral studied the sensor readings with growing confusion. "Are you certain these are human settlements?" "The communication signals are definitely human languages, sir. But the settlement pattern is unlike anything we've seen from any spacefaring species." What made the discovery even more puzzling was that the small human settlements were connected by quantum communication networks that were somehow both more primitive and more advanced than anything the fleet had ever encountered. The individual nodes were tiny, but the network as a whole was incredibly resilient. "Each settlement appears to be completely self-sufficient," reported Chief Engineer. "They have their own power generation, manufacturing, food production, and defense systems. But they're also connected in a way that allows them to share resources and information instantly." "How is that possible?" "It's like a web, sir. If any single settlement were destroyed, the network would continue functioning without interruption. But if they need to work together on something, they can coordinate their efforts across the entire system almost instantly." The human ships that approached the fleet were equally puzzling. Small vessels, each carrying maybe 50 people, but moving with a precision and efficiency that put the massive galactic fleet to shame. They arranged themselves in loose formations that seemed chaotic, but somehow felt perfectly organized. "Incoming communication," announced Officer. The main screen flickered to life, showing a middle-aged human woman with graying hair and calm eyes. She was wearing simple blue clothing without any of the elaborate decorations that usually marked important officials. "Welcome to the 442 system," she said with a warm smile. "I'm Captain Maria Santos of the research vessel Curiosity. We've been expecting you." Admiral found herself momentarily speechless. After months of crisis and desperate searching, the humans seemed remarkably calm about being found. "Captain Santos, I am Admiral of the Galactic Defense Fleet. I need to speak with your leaders about an urgent matter affecting galactic civilization." "Of course, President is currently on New Harmony. I'll escort you there. Fair warning, though, she's likely to be working in her garden when we arrive." 2 hours later, Admiral found herself walking through what could only be described as a park. New Harmony looked nothing like a capital world. Instead of government buildings and military installations, she saw small communities scattered through forests and grasslands, connected by walking paths and small electric vehicles. President was indeed in a garden, harvesting vegetables, alongside several other people who might have been government officials or simply neighbors. She looked up as Admiral approached, brushing dirt off her hands. "Admiral," she said pleasantly, "I heard you had quite a journey to find us. Would you like some tea? We can talk while we walk." The Admiral had prepared for many possible scenarios, but negotiating galactic policy while strolling through a vegetable garden had not been among them. "Madam President, galactic civilization is facing a crisis. We need your people to return and help restore the systems that are failing." President nodded thoughtfully as she led the way down a tree-lined path. We've been monitoring the situation through our passive sensors. It's about what we expected would happen. Expected? Admiral, may I ask you a question? In your military experience, what happens to an army that becomes too dependent on a single supply line? The Admiral frowned. If the supply line is cut, the army collapses. Exactly. For over 2 centuries, humanity has been accidentally becoming the single point of failure for galactic civilization. We kept trying to fix problems we saw, and the more we fixed, the more dependent everyone became on our fixes. They paused beside a small pond where several children were playing with toy boats. President watched them for a moment before continuing. We didn't withdraw to hurt anyone, Admiral. Because we realized we were hurting galactic civilization by making it fragile. Every time we improved a system, we made it a little more dependent on human maintenance. We were creating exactly the kind of vulnerable structure that couldn't survive our absence. But people are suffering now. Systems are failing. The economy is collapsing. And galactic civilization is learning to be truly independent for the first time in centuries. Yes, it's painful, but it's also necessary. Admiral felt a surge of frustration. So you're going to let billions suffer while they learn independence? President stopped walking and turned to face her. Admiral, look around you. What do you see? The Admiral looked around at the small communities, the children playing, the people working together in small groups. I see a primitive society that has abandoned the achievements of galactic civilization. I see a resilient society where no single failure can cause system-wide collapse. Every community can survive on its own, but they choose to work together. No one person or organization is essential to the whole system's survival. That's not possible with a galactic-scale civilization. Isn't it? Admiral, your fleet has 10,000 ships from 17 species. How many of those ships could you lose before your mission would fail? The question caught Admiral off guard. If I lost my command ship and primary communication vessels, coordination would become impossible. So your entire fleet depends on maybe 10 critical ships. Well, yes, but that's how efficient organization works. President smiled sadly. And that's exactly the problem. Admiral, what would happen if tomorrow every human in the galaxy disappeared completely? Galactic civilization would collapse. Exactly. We accidentally made ourselves essential to your survival. That's not strength, Admiral. That's dangerous fragility. As they walked back toward the landing area, President explained what humanity had been building in their short time beyond the rim. Communities that could function independently but chose to cooperate. Technology that was distributed rather than centralized. Systems designed to survive the loss of any component, including humans themselves. We'll help, President said as they reached the shuttle. But not by returning to our old role. We'll teach anyone who wants to learn how to build truly resilient systems. Systems that don't depend on us or anyone else for survival. Admiral felt a strange mixture of relief and unease. The humans would help, but not in the way she had expected. What you're describing would mean rebuilding galactic civilization from the ground up. Yes, President agreed. It would mean choosing resilience over efficiency, independence over optimization. It would mean accepting that a truly stable civilization must be designed to function even when its builders are gone. As the shuttle lifted off from New Harmony, Admiral realized that humanity's quiet exit had been more than just a withdrawal. It had been a test. A test that galactic civilization had failed. But perhaps there was still time to learn how to pass it. The news of humanity's offer spread across the galaxy faster than quantum communication had ever carried information. Perhaps it was because the message was so simple that even damaged communication networks could relay it clearly. The humans would share their knowledge, but only with those willing to rebuild their civilization from the ground up. The response split the galaxy in ways that no one had anticipated. On Prime, Ambassador stood before the planetary assembly with a proposal that would have seemed impossible just months before. "The humans are offering to teach us their methods of distributed resilience," he announced to the assembled representatives. "But adopting their approach would mean abandoning our centralized government structure and rebuilding our society as a network of independent communities." Eldera leaned forward in her council seat. "You're suggesting we dismantle a governmental system that has served us for 3,000 years. I'm suggesting we learn from a species that built a civilization capable of surviving its own absence," replied. "Our current system nearly collapsed when we lost human technical support. Their system is designed to keep working even if the humans disappear entirely." The debate that followed would be remembered as a turning point in history. In the end, they voted to begin what they called the Great Restructuring, a gradual transformation from centralized planetary government to networked regional autonomy. The first delegation arrived at New Harmony 3 weeks later. They found themselves working alongside humans to design systems where no single failure could cascade into total collapse. It was difficult work that challenged everything they thought they knew about efficient organization. "It feels chaotic," admitted engineer during her first week of training. Her human instructor, Dr. James Park, nodded understandingly. "Resilient systems often do, but chaos and redundancy are what allow a system to survive unexpected damage. A perfectly efficient system is also perfectly fragile." Not everyone was willing to embrace such radical change. On Dominion Prime, High Command was taking a very different approach. General addressed the military leadership with characteristic directness. "The humans have made themselves essential to our operations and then withdrawn that support," he declared. "This is either incompetence or deliberate sabotage. Either way, our response should be to rebuild our systems without any dependency on human knowledge." "Sir," ventured intelligence officer, "our analysis suggests that rebuilding without human improvements will set us back decades in capability." "Then we rebuild," General stated firmly. "Better to be independent and less capable than dependent and vulnerable. We will restore our systems to their original specifications and develop our own improvements." The Dominion launched the largest military engineering project in their history. Thousands of ships, millions of personnel, and vast resources were devoted to recreating the centralized systems that had served the galaxy for. They would build bigger, stronger, and more impressive than before, and they would do it without any human assistance. The results were mixed. The Dominion succeeded in rebuilding functional systems, but the effort consumed enormous resources and produced technology that was noticeably less capable than what they had lost. More importantly, their rebuilt systems had all the same vulnerabilities that had made them dependent on human support in the first place. Meanwhile, species that chose the human path were discovering surprising benefits from distributed design. The Republic began restructuring their medical system as a network of small, independent hospitals rather than centralized medical complexes. When a plasma storm knocked out communications in the Beta sector, the distributed hospitals continued operating normally while traditional centralized systems failed. "It's actually more efficient," reported Chief Medical Administrator Dr. A with surprise. "We expected distributed systems to be wasteful, but they eliminate most of the coordination overhead that centralized systems require." The mining consortium made an even more dramatic discovery. When they restructured their operations as networks of small, independent mining teams, they found that total production actually increased. "Small teams are more adaptable," explained Mining Coordinator H. "When they encounter problems, they solve them immediately instead of waiting for orders from Central Command. And when one team has equipment failure, it doesn't shut down the entire operation." The transformation was not without conflict. The galaxy began to fracture into regions that embraced distributed resilience and those that clung to centralized efficiency. Trade between the two systems became difficult as their approaches to technology and organization grew increasingly incompatible. On Nexus Prime, the Galactic Council itself was dividing. Some species voted to adopt human-inspired reforms, while others insisted on rebuilding the old systems. The resulting compromise satisfied no one and worked poorly for everyone. Chancellor found himself presiding over an institution that was slowly tearing itself apart. "We have become two different civilizations trying to share one government," he observed to his staff. The solution, when it came, was as simple as it was radical. The Council voted to dissolve itself as a unified galactic government and reform as a loose confederation of autonomous regions. Species could choose their own organizational models and cooperate voluntarily rather than through centralized mandate. "It feels like giving up," admitted Trade Minister. "It feels like growing up," replied Ambassador, who had become an advocate for the distributed approach. 3 years after humanity's withdrawal, the galaxy had stabilized into something unprecedented. A civilization built around resilience rather than efficiency. The species that had adopted human principles found their societies more adaptable and self-reliant. They traded freely with each other, but weren't dependent on any single relationship for survival. The species that had rebuilt centralized systems remained powerful but vulnerable. They achieved impressive individual capabilities, but struggled with the same fragility that had led to the crisis. President received regular reports on these developments from human observation posts scattered throughout galactic space. She reviewed them during her weekly walks through the forests of New Harmony. "Are you satisfied with how things turned out?" asked Dr. Park, who had returned from his assignment training engineers. "Satisfied isn't the right word," replied thoughtfully. "The galaxy had to choose between efficiency and resilience, and different species made different choices. That's probably the most realistic outcome we could have hoped for. Some species are still struggling with systems that could fail catastrophically. And some species are thriving with systems that grow stronger under stress. Over time, I think the galaxy will learn which approach serves them better." They paused at a small memorial garden that had been planted to honor the species that had suffered during the transition. The garden was designed in the distributed style, many small sections that created a beautiful whole, but each section capable of thriving independently. "Do you think we'll ever rejoin galactic civilization?" asked Dr. Park. President considered the question carefully. "We never really left it. We just stopped trying to hold it together. The galaxy is learning to hold itself together now. That's healthier for everyone." As evening approached over New Harmony, communication networks across the galaxy carried the daily exchange of information, trade negotiations, cultural programs, and scientific research. But unlike the old networks, these systems were designed to continue functioning even if entire regions disappeared. The galaxy had learned humanity's most important lesson. True civilization isn't about building systems so advanced that they couldn't function without their creators. True civilization is about building systems so resilient that they continue to grow and improve long after their creators are gone. In their quiet way, humans had given the galaxy something more valuable than technology or trade goods. They had given them a future that didn't depend on any single species, government, or system continuing to exist. The galaxy was finally learning to stand on its own. And perhaps most importantly, it was learning that standing on its own didn't mean standing alone. Independence and cooperation weren't opposites. They were partners in building a civilization that could survive anything the universe might throw at it. As the stars came out over New Harmony, President smiled at the thought that somewhere among those distant lights, Billions of beings were discovering that the strongest civilizations are built not on dependence, but on the wisdom to choose cooperation freely. Humanity's quiet exit had indeed shattered the Council and transformed the galaxy. But what emerged from the pieces was something stronger, more beautiful, and more sustainable than what had come before. The galaxy had grown up, and growing up, as humans had always known, was worth the temporary pain of letting go of childhood's comfortable dependencies.